So what I thought we could talk about tonight is from where to where. where do we imagine we are now, and where do we believe that we're going, right? The spiritual journey, right? So to go on a journey, this spiritual quest, there must be some belief about what our current condition is, and some can only be an imagined belief about what the goal, where this is leading to. So this question of where are we now, and where is it going towards, is pretty significant. You would think it would be a relatively easy question, but when we try to pin it down and say exactly where it is that we are now and exactly where it is that we imagine we're going, we find it to be a much more challenging question, right? So the idea of being here and desiring to go there somehow is founded on, to some degree, some level of dissatisfaction. Where I am right now is not quite right, not quite good enough. It could be better, and the journey that I imagine will take me there. That's, in a lot of ways, it's the motivation for the spiritual journey at all, somehow a dissatisfaction with whatever it is that we are now. If we're totally satisfied, everything was just perfectly fine the way it is now, there'd be no motivation for movement at all. So, if we're totally content with life, however it presents itself moment to moment at all times, we're either fast asleep or fully awake, one of those two. Right? But this sense of being dissatisfied with something that's present now and moving towards something at some time in the future, of course, because any journey will take time. That's the one of the assumptions of this idea of path or journey that we're taking towards some future goal. The issue is that we don't really know where this is leading towards. We may have read about it, we may have heard other people's descriptions of it, but the descriptions are, well, at best conceptual, right? They're not our direct experience. All we can do is try to put it in the framework, of whatever experiences that we may have had up till that point. And it seems like one of the things that is motivating us down this path is some idea about some wonderful state that we could call awakening or enlightenment. And that's what I want, right? I want to go from here, where I am, where it's not present, I know that, and I want to go there, which I believe is a possibility, and that's what I want, right? So this is what we're talking about here, self-improvement. It's somehow, we have to start out with a denial at some level that it's present now in order to go find it at some future point, right? That's part of the assumption that we make. But one of the things that we can notice is if that which we are seeking is already present, very much like we looked at when we noticed that there was awareness already present when we went exploring in through the body. If we're looking for some state and we believe that it's not present now, but can be present in the future, then we're denying the possibility of its presence now in hopes of finding it in the future. The problem is, if it exists here and now, and we're looking for it elsewhere, we won't find it. You know, we'll of course eventually find it. I mean, we can't avoid noticing what we essentially are forever. I mean, that's sort of the one guarantee here. Ultimately, full enlightenment for everyone, just because it's not possible to not eventually notice what's already present. We may be able to ignore it for a very long time. Jed McKenna says that it is difficult to overestimate how we humans can avoid noticing the obvious. We can avoid it for a very long time, but ultimately we will notice, it will be revealed, we will stumble upon it in some way of what we truly are, and find out that it is and has always been present. But this movement of improvement from where I think I am to some future point that will lead to some state that is often described as eternal bliss, right? But bliss is a state. It's a state like sadness and anxiety and grief and joy and boredom are all sort of states of mind. Bliss is also, bliss is, you know, we can certainly experience bliss. What is not possible is eternal, everlasting bliss. It can feel, when awakeness first dawns, it can feel extremely blissful, and it can last for a long time. It can last for even a year or two, but it will eventually settle down, and it'll settle down to what I would call a high degree of okayness. Right? I know that doesn't sound as motivational as eternal bliss, but that's actually what it evolves to. Eckhart Tolle talks about that. He talks about the initial bliss, and then over time having it settled into contentedness, you know, a state of okayness with whatever arises. So this isn't to deny that preferences, you know, may not still exist. You know, we may still prefer a pat on the back rather than a blow to the head, of course. But there, with awakening, there's a sense of being okay with whatever happens. Now, in spirituality, a lot of times they talk about, you know, having no preferences, as if it were a means to gain awakening. You know, so we can try to have no preferences, right? Anybody ever try to have no preferences? You know, but the point is, if we're having to try not to have preferences, it means that we do have preferences, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have to try. So just thinking that I'll try to have no preferences and maybe that'll improve my chances of getting enlightened is just backwards, right? You know, the point is to recognize that this body-mind does have preferences, and we may be highly motivated by those preferences and see those in action and see the consequences of those. That's all instructional. What we find out eventually is that there is the recognition that life is what is living through us and always has been. And we finally come into alignment with that and are okay with whatever happens. So the no preference concept in spirituality is a byproduct of waking up. It's not a path to waking up. Does that make sense? So, if we find ourselves, not quite sure, where exactly we are or what the next step may be, it's useful not to try to look too far down the path. Like I'm here and, full abiding enlightenment is somewhere off in the distance. How do I get from here to there? Whatever we come up with in answer to that question is bound to be conceptual and imaginary. It's like the, mythical carrot of eternal bliss hanging out there somewhere in the distance. How do I get there? But if our belief in what enlightenment is eternal bliss, and we're seeking that, then we have, the body-mind trying to figure out how to attain a state of perpetual bliss, basically a high state that goes on forever. It's like becoming intoxicated without the hangover. And it's really, in essence, no different than seeking pleasure from, all the ways that people normally seek pleasure, through power and wealth and fame and intoxicants and just, all these normal ways of seeking, acquisition, all these normal ways to seek pleasure in, normal everyday life. So, when we think of, well, now I'm a spiritual person, and what I know that I don't want all those cheap thrills. I want eternal bliss, right? But it's the same movement. It's the same movement of the personal self seeking self-aggrandizement, right? So if that's the motivation for our movement down this spiritual path, just to feel better, to feel good all the time, I just want to be at peace, and I'll, I don't want to have to work too hard. That's a different trajectory than I just have to find out what's true, and I don't care what I have to go through to find that out. It's a different path. They lead to different places. If we're just after high states, we'll undoubtedly experience, an occasional high state, maybe relatively often, but not without effort and not without intervening pain. Right? So when we're seeking the high states, life has this dualistic quality about it that, you can't just have one side of the pendulum. Life seems to have the inherent quality that for goodness to exist, there has to be evil or wrongness. For light to exist, there has to be darkness. It's just the way it is. For birth to happen, death is an inevitable part of that process. So we can do the kinds of things that we've been taught need to be done in order to get from where we believe that we are, let's say, an unenlightened state, to be able to move the needle over to the enlightened state. Things like, doing good works, meditating a lot, changing our diet, practicing selflessness, practicing compassion. All of those are wonderful things. They're all fundamentally based on an assumption that what we essentially are is somehow absent. So, and all those practices are fine. Whatever we're drawn towards, we should certainly explore them to the fullest. But the one thing that we as seekers seem reluctant to do is to question our beliefs. I mean, question our really good beliefs, the ones we're quite certain about, those beliefs. Because that, once we open that door, there's not a stopping point. The more we question our fundamental beliefs, the further it takes us. And where it takes us is the discovery that all beliefs are false. Not as a conceptual idea, not as a philosophy, but just the direct personal experience of all beliefs that may have some relative truth to them. They may be true at one point in our life, but not at another, or in one situation, but not in another. But what I mean by true, absolutely true, is true in all cases, under all circumstances, at all times. So that narrows the field a lot. And so any concept that we're holding on to isn't it. Any concept, just by definition, is less than the reality of it. Right? Any concept is a word construct that's attempting to describe something, an experience or situation or idea. But that word-based concept is always going to be less than the reality of, well, anything. Reality of any direct experience, right? Direct present moment experience, sensation. So this point of questioning beliefs is to bring us to a point where what we're really doing is sort of emptying our cup, right? We come to spirituality with a cup that's pretty full, right? And had a lot of experiences in life, a lot of ideas, things that we believe shouldn't be. And if we've been in spirituality for a while, we may have even more beliefs about who we are, what should happen, how other people should behave, what enlightenment is. So the idea of emptying the cup, there's a pretty well-known Zen story about a student comes to the Zen master, and the Zen master invites him for a cup of tea and starts pouring the tea, and the cup fills up, and he keeps on pouring till it's overflowing the cup in the saucer. And the student asks, what are you doing? And the master just says, it's like your mind, if it's already full, there's nothing that can be shown. There's nothing that can be revealed. So that's what this process is really to empty the cup from beliefs, opinions, ideas, how things should and shouldn't be, to end up with a relatively clean slate where we're just open, receptive, in a state basically of not knowing. At least at one point in our life, it's essential really to get to a point of admitting to ourselves that we just don't know. Don't know who we are, don't know what this life's about. And that unknowing, you can just sense into it when we know, when we're certain, this, what we're available to hearing shrinks. But when we don't know, we just get back to just the raw presence of being available to whatever may be shown to us through life, through the next moment, through the inner teacher, then there's an openness, there's a receptivity there. But what we're trying to do by getting back to, let's say, a clean slate, is to try to dismantle some of the veils that have built up over time in this instrument of our body mind, because this is really all we've got to work with, right? We've got this body, we have this mind, we have the ability to think, reason. I know in spirituality a lot of times thinking and reason are considered the bad guys, but it's actually a really valuable tool. I mean, it's one of the few tools that we can really use. So the idea of using reason to explore beliefs that may not be true that we're holding on to is, well, Ramana uses the example of using a thorn, to pick out another thorn that has been embedded in our foot. So we're using thought to extract thoughts that are falsely held. And when you're done, you throw both thorns away. You don't end up with better thorns. You end up with no thorns. So that's the process of using our reasoning mind to really look deeply at what our beliefs are. I mean, the really foundational beliefs. Like, I know who I am, or I know I was born, or I know I am the thinker of my thoughts. I know I choose whatever I do. These are, commonly held beliefs, but when we really go looking at them, they're much more flimsy than we ever thought they were. So we can use what we have to really look deeply, but it's really a way of dissembling some of the overburden that's built up over what is always and inherently present, which is this awareness. But when we're looking at this journey, if we look too far down the road, then it becomes conceptual, it becomes imaginary. So it's much more useful to look at just what the next step is. It's sort of like this path is illuminated one step at a time. And one of the ways to tell what the next step is just, if something is causing us to suffer, not just once in a blue moon, but repeatedly, or if something is just a source of wonderment, real curiosity, or a source of just being baffled, like we just don't understand it, and we really want to. It's got sort of a grip on us. Those kind of things. Those are the next step, is wherever that leads, to really look at that, because those are the things that actually have energy for us. If we look too far in the distance, like, I just want abiding enlightenment. Well, sure, but how do you get from here to there? And the answer is just step by step, right? And we have to follow that thread wherever it takes us. So we're not trying to manage the journey. We're trying to, just trust the process. Trust that there's a greater wisdom at work here. Okay, it may not be obvious at the time. It may look like we make all kinds of detours. We get stuck for too long a time. We feel like we should be making more progress. Or we're not making as much progress as the other person, whatever our storyline is. But when we look back, sort of look in the rear view mirror, we can notice that there was a wisdom at work there, and that the sense of it is nothing was unnecessary. To other people's eyes, it may appear that way. But when we look back for ourselves, we can't say that where we are today, which is hopefully, let's just say a more mature perspective than 10 years ago or last year or yesterday. Hopefully that's true. So this movement is just seeing, being willing to take the next step, almost like taking the step in darkness and trusting life to show us the way. Without the demand on life that it revealed to us the entire journey that's ahead of us. Just the next step. That's all that's really needed. And the reason I say that each step is necessary is that that's what happens, right? It's like the mountain climber. It's, in a sense, it's only the last step that gets the mountain climber up to the summit that is the achievement, you could say. But to say that all those other steps were unnecessary would be foolish, right? They're all necessary. And we never quite know when the last step is, because we don't see the whole journey, because we don't actually know what this enlightenment is and will look like, and how exactly we're going to get there. But what we can do is be open, be willing, be a little courageous, be curious, be honest about what we know and what we don't know, and just keep moving further, right? So anytime we get too satisfied with what we've sort of realized up to that point, that degree of satisfaction is, in some sense, holding us back from being willing to go further. So this word "further" is useful in this context. Seeing that, yes, I may have realized something really significant, and there's a sense of yes, and there's still more to be seen. It's not dismissing what we've already seen, but it's also being honest with ourselves and being willing to continue, right? So one of the characteristics of this journey is that it's an individual process. Nobody else can do it for you. At best, someone else can suggest avenues to look. That can save time. That can be helpful. There are teachers or gurus that can, impart energy, Shakti, instill high states. Great, wonderful. But it's not a lasting transformation. It might be instructional, it might be, highly enjoyable. It may reveal some things, but it won't fundamentally transform our perception of what we are. So that, in a sense, it's good news, right? If somebody else could do it for you, awaken you, right? Then theoretically they would have the power to unawaken you. But if it's something that can be recognized by one's own search, then that's not something that can be taken away. It can't be attained, but it can't be taken away either. It can be recognized. That's what we can do. And what we recognize is that it was always present all along, and our job is to see through anything that's obscuring it. See through false beliefs, basically. So I know there's this New Age philosophy that, when a certain percentage of humans wake up, then everybody else will quickly wake up, and that'll solve things. But again, we're still looking to depend on having the world be fixed in order to feel at ease about living in it. So we're still dependent on the world to change in order for us to feel okay, okay about living in it. So, this movement, things that we believe that we have to do, is in inserting a timeline into something that unnecessarily, because there really aren't any prerequisites for awakening. It is imminently available at all times for everyone, but there is a necessity to look, to be willing to look deeply, not from knowledge, but from just sheer willingness, sheer willing to be open to it. So there's a term in spirituality, just spiritual ignorance. Doesn't mean lack of intelligence. What it means is believing things that aren't true, right? And so this spiritual ignorance is the cause of doing things, saying things that aren't really in alignment with life, aren't appropriate to the situation. So when there's unawareness functioning, and we speak or act or think from that unawareness, that has ripples, right? We say something that's inappropriate, we get angry inappropriately, we get judgmental, whatever, and that has a ripple effect, and it affects those around us, and that energy is perpetuated, often amplified, perpetuated, and then spread around. So that's the effect of this ignorance. You could say that what we would call evil in the world is the result of ignorance. It's not a separate entity apart from, the loving God. What we're talking about as source is infinite and includes all. But this particular manifestation that appears to us as evil, harming other people, is created out of ignorance, right? So we can see that, we can see the effects of that. I mean, that's what's called karma also. So we can see the effects of that and say, well, somebody ought to do something about that. The world would be a better place if everybody was just kinder and gentler. But again, we're putting the focus outside. outside on the other, and often less than willing to look at how that may be operating in ourselves. So the first order of business is to look at what's happening here, to look at that deeply, to really see through that ignorance is really just misunderstanding of who we truly are. And that's really our job in this lifetime, is to see through that, to see where our beliefs and opinions and judgments and prejudices are still functioning. And the seeing releases them. Something totally magical about them. You don't have to try to make them go away. You have to see them clearly. When they're seen clearly, an illusion by its very nature is released upon seeing it clearly. So that's really our job, is to see it clearly and get all the way down to the point where we are receptive to life. We come to a state of a high degree of okayness with life. Come into alignment with life. And I suggest that life as it is, exactly as it is, with all its apparent imperfections and horrors and tragedies and suffering, is the perfect venue for awakening. And normally our discomfort with that, we put the blame on the world and forget to look here. But it's really an opportunity for life to sort of nudge us in the direction of looking more deeply at what our beliefs and opinions are. So the idea here isn't to have better beliefs, or it's not beliefs versus disbeliefs. It's just seeing that all of that is just an attempt by our egoic structure to conceptualize things so that we can be comfortable with it. And when we eventually give up that demand for comfort, we find ourselves in a place that is much more free, much more authentic, much more present, much more willing to do whatever's necessary in the moment, much more available, not based on beliefs, but just based on the knowingness that what we essentially are is awareness, is already at peace, is already fully present in all of us already. When that's recognized, then when we move in the world, when there's actions to be taken in the world or things to be said in the world, it comes from a different place. It comes from a place of greater authenticity, greater appropriateness, because we're not in it for our own pleasures. or out of our own fears. Right? You know, there's a movement because it is appropriate to the situation. Not from any agenda, not from any dogma, not from any theology, you know, just because it's in that moment, it is the right thing to do. It's seen as the right thing to do. So it doesn't come from a, you know, a set of ideals. It doesn't come from a set of morality, surprisingly. It just comes from, in that moment, that's what's appropriate. 10 minutes later, it might be the wrong thing to say or do, but in that moment, what's sort of shown is that that's what's needed at that time. So this movement from where we believe that we are to where we think we're going really needs thorough examination. You know, it's really a process of subtraction of, you know, where we, week to week, we believe less and less rather than more and more. You know, sort of clearing away the debris to get at what is fundamental. When all of the false beliefs are cleared away, then what's left is true, right? So truth is singular, right? There's one ultimate truth, and it's what you are. It's not an idea or a concept or anything that can be put into the words. It's what we all essentially are. Right? So to discover that, it's a discovery, not an attainment, right? Because we can't attain what we already are. It's a discovery that is found when everything that's not true is seen through. So our job is, rather than seeking truth, what's much more helpful is to identify what's not true and examine that closely, bring it into the light of day. And I don't know, there's some disinfecting quality about, you know, bringing it up into consciousness, up into the light of day. And so we don't have to try to make it go away. Our job is to see it clearly and be willing to see it clearly. And that will bring us home.